I'm Sire, and this is Conversations with Sire. Today's guest is my friend Kia. Kia is an unapologetic agitator who creates content that pushes the conversation forward. When she's not writing and tweeting, you can find Kia in front of the camera discussing media, culture, and society. She has been featured on NPR, BET, and TV1.com discussing sex, gender, theology, and more. Kia earned a BA in English from Spelman College and graduated from Kennesaw State University with an MA in professional writing. She's currently pursuing a Master of Divinity from the Chicago Theological Seminary. That was a mouthful. Welcome, my guest, Kia. Hey, boo.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
This is going to be fun because we both have our drinks.
Yes.
And we are always a good time when we're talking. And today's conversation is going to be quite explosive. Kia don't hold nothing back, and her perception of things related to religion and the Bible are thought-provoking, to say the least, for some of our more traditional people. Are you ready to call us some shit, girl?
Let's go. I'm good at stirring shit. It's fun.
So let's start with what made you want to study theology?
So I have been in church all of my life. I call myself a pew baby. Like growing up, I cannot remember a Sunday when I was not in church. It just wasn't a choice. It was just something that happened. And as I got older, and I always was able to find like God or something theologically related in television and movies, and like where the church was telling me it wasn't supposed to be. Like I would be listening to a rap song by Lil Wayne, and I could see like I had this whole imagery of like God and theology in that. So I started writing about it years ago on a blog that I have taken down. But I decided to go to seminary because I really wanted to be responsible with the conversations I was having. I wanted to do more than repeat what I had been taught in church, but I really wanted to understand the history and the culture and the context of not just scripture and the Bible, but our doctrine and theological beliefs. And I wanted to be able to bring that into a conversation with culture, our music, our television, entertainment, and justice around social justice issues. So the first time I got a seminary application was in 2006. I finally mailed one in 2016, and here I am. I'm taking the slow and steady route because I'm still working full time. Right. So yeah, I'm going to school part-time at Chicago Theological.
What I love about Conversations with Sire is that I'm having conversations with people who I talk to already. So these are conversations we've had, and we're just expounding upon them for an audience.
Yes.
And that's how I know this is going to be some mess. Because we talk some shit. I want to start talking about church as a cultural entity in the Black community. It's not just a religion. As someone who does not consider himself Christian anymore, but was raised strictly Baptist and went to Catholic school the entirety of my education outside of college, I know that it's cultural. Like I have removed myself from Christianity in all ways, but there are so many, the music, I don't listen to gospel, but there's some things I cannot remove myself from because it's not necessarily about the religious context. It's about the memories. It's about the warmth and comfort that it brings. There's a whole ton of jokes that only people who grew up in church can understand, all of that, you know. So, and that's very ingrained in the Black community. What is your perception of why our community revolves in many cases around church and around Christianity?
Well, I think when you look at society today and the conversations we're having and how America has kind of isolated Black people and pushed us into our own communities. And James Cone, who is a theologian, Black liberation theologian. He talks about how there were a time when Black people had two safe spaces. It was the church and the juke joint. So church is one of the places where we could go, we could be safe, we were in control of what was going on there. And it is where ideally we went to be fed, to be built up, to learn to sing, to become musicians. I learned to speak in the church. Like, my mom made sure that Easter speeches, welcomes,
Girl.
It's how we learn how to participate in community. So, and what's hard about that is, even when, and we'll probably get into this a little later, but that also makes it hard for us to pull away from the church. Because you lose that community, you lose that support. So that's really difficult in toxic or abusive situations, when you feel it necessary to pull back for your own well-being.
For me, I just connected. I always had questions. So I was the kid in church that had questions. And here, when Cain killed Abel, where were these people? Who were these other people that he went, so it's like certain things don't make sense. And then, like, obviously, like Noah's Ark, you're like, all these animals were on that boat and none of them killed each other. Like just like, those basic things.
Yes.
Where I was made to feel like I was blasphemous for asking those questions. And it's like, well, aren't those questions that one would ask? Like,
And when seminary was refreshing for me, because it was a space where I could not only get ask those questions, but also understand how the Bible came to be, to see how those holes and gaps in knowledge came about. I have a Bible. It's a Harper's Collins Study Bible, and it gives an introduction of every book in the Bible with historical and cultural context. And the one thing I remember, first week of seminary, we reading the first 12 chapters of Genesis and have to read the introduction. And it basically says, this should not be taken literally. It is, they call it myths, and not in our understanding of myths, but basically it is people trying to understand the world around them. It is ancient people trying to understand the world around them. So for us to take that literally and have these holes and create these holes where, when people ask the questions, we're so insecure in our faith. And because the Bible does not spell out these holes, doesn't have a bridge for these holes, we feel attacked when people ask us these questions, instead of just understanding the culture in which this text was written. That is unhealthy at best.
You're shaking tables. We ain't even like a good 5 minutes in, and you already talk about insecure in your faith.
I mean, but I will say this. I don't think it's their fault that they're insecure in their faith in some reasons, because we are taught not to question God.
Yeah, we're taught not to question.
Which is really weird, because faith is not, like, the whole idea of faith is not based in fact or truth. It's based in an idea and a belief. And this, like, there is always questions in faith. If you don't have questions, then it would be fact. So,
but you know what? For me, it's interesting, because the way our relationship is taught to be with God is the same way that our relationship is taught to be with our parents.
And when you take that on back to, like, slave plantations, it's very much, we see God as a master, and we are here to do what we're told and to not ask questions, and just, it's an unhealthy dynamic in any and every way.
I remember, because I had such a rocky relationship with my mother growing up, I remember being beat over the head with "I'm thy father and thy mother." And then I remember reading, I can't remember the exact scripture, but like, do not provoke your children to anger. And we were not taught that. And I remember bringing that up, like, why are we learning these things? And you're teaching our parents that they have power in the Bible, but you're not teaching us that we also have power, that we are taught to be respected as well. And so that's one of my big things, is that I don't have as much a problem with the text of the Bible, but the culture of the church and Christianity makes me ill. I just cannot. I can't.
It's kind of like it's been used to control people instead of
absolutely
build them up and to give them faith and to help them understand who they are in God. Because if you tell a kid that they are not to be provoked for anger, like, that gives some dignity to their personhood, where their parents can't just control them and do what they want to without some pushback, because you're violating me. So why would the church do that?
Well, it's got to be control, because if children knew that they had power in the Bible, they would utilize it. And so you don't want your children having that knowledge if you're trying to use the Bible to manipulate them into a certain action, right? Like, when you spoke earlier about the insecurity in the faith, it made me think of a situation that happened with a coworker years ago, where I worked at a school and the kids had a Halloween dress up, and she was telling the kids that they shouldn't celebrate Halloween because it was the devil's birthday. And I remember being absolutely positively furious, because not only is that inappropriate, it's also inaccurate. And so, why do you think that certain, and I also remember, just to bring more context to the situation, people having a problem with us reading Harry Potter and all those things, because everything is demonic. Everything is seen as demonic. Why do you think that's such a fear or an aversion to?
I was talking to my friend Laura, who grew up, amazing person. She grew up very evangelical, and she does a lot of research and writing around that. And she made a statement that has really stuck with me. And she talked about how evangelical Christians are trained to fear everything except for the stuff that is really dangerous. So we are trained to to think of the world as a culture war. We are trained to see, like, I am in this world, but not of the world. There is, I am a spiritual being in a world. So there's always this separation that we built up. So it's easy to say anything that the church doesn't like is demonic or evil to feed into this culture war. But rarely, and I mean, this is going to depend on where you're going to church and everything, but rarely are we talking about how misogyny is evil or problematic or homophobia. Like, we don't deal with the real evils. We would rather have a culture war against Harry Potter or a culture war against, like,
gay people.
Listen. And even the fact that we are in this Black Lives Matter uprising, the largest civil rights movement that the world has probably ever seen. And for the church to be so disconnected from that movement, like, when you look at the 1965 civil rights movement, the church was front and center. And here we are, 60 years later, and the church is not in this movement. And not only that, it is the people who the church has ostracized who are leading us in this new freedom movement. And
whether people like it or not.
Right. So what does that say about how the church has so disconnected from, how the Black church has so much disconnected from Black culture and Black people with these imaginary culture wars?
Yeah, I think it's a really complicated issue.
Yes.
Because I think the world is moving towards being way more liberal than people would like. And so they're resistant to that. They're resistant to that because a more liberal world will render the church obsolete.
And
because we move away from, well, the more liberal we become as a society, the more people move away from religion. And the interesting thing is that the statistics show, I have to put a graph up if I can find one, that we are the only mass educated country, I hate to say first world, where people generally, the higher the education, the least religious this country is. We're the only country that's hyper educated and hyper religious.
And I would debate we have a lot of book knowledge, yes, but I would debate our intelligence in that with just the way we see.
Well, intelligence in general, yeah, come on.
But I would also, I don't know if it has to be, I don't know if becoming more liberal means we have to leave the church. I think becoming more liberal means we have to leave the church as we understand it right now.
Yes.
Because when you look in the text and you look what's really in there, I don't talk about the Bible like it's a perfect book, because it is not. There are parts of the text that are horrific. But what I like to, I put it this way, like, there's one thing that pops up across time, across book, across author, across testament, and that is a story of justice, where I think the major theme that comes out of the Bible is like, God is for the marginalized people. God is for oppressed people. And I think that fits into a liberal world.
Someone needs to tell these white evangelicals and Trump supporters that.
No, and that is the problem. For so long, white evangelical, the Christian right, conservative voters have been centered around religion, that it's hard for us to even comprehend or see more liberal and progressive versions of Christianity.
Recently, you and I talked about the Church of Satan and Satanism, and how it's funny to me because this is really going to get some people upset, but
it is
how they have showed up in this anti-Trump movement, and how it is grossly misunderstood, because the Satanists don't actually worship Satan. They call themselves Satan as a rebellion against Christianity. Satan is the antithesis of Jesus in God, right? So they just named themselves that to give you the big F you to Christianity. And
yes.
So why do you think they have been so active? And
so I first saw this, so like most people, I thought the Church of Satan worshiped Satan for a long time, but I remember around 2016, it was a picture of Trump doing something weird per usual, and someone mentioned the Church of Satan in that, and they responded to the tweet and they were like, no, this is not who we are. We do not condone this. And I was like, wow, the Church of Satan doesn't even mess with Trump. And that sent me down my rabbit hole when I started studying and when I started looking into, like, what do they believe? And they are really, people will have, I think most people have more things in common with the Church of Satan than they ever believe. They are really humanistic people. They believe in, they are practical, they are pragmatic, skeptical, and materialistic. They live like most people who call themselves like Christians and stuff live. That, like, they're carnal beings. They lean into like their humanistic side. And Satan is just a symbol for everything that they dislike about religion, specifically Christianity. And that's why, like, they don't actually believe in the existence of Satan, but that's why they use him as a symbol, because they represent the opposite of everything that we have been taught mainstream Christianity is.
And I remember when I have a lot of work stories. I remember I had a coworker who I was really cool with, not close. And people would say, oh, you shouldn't talk to her because she worships Satan. She's a Satanist. And I don't think she actually was, but she was weird and edgy and into darker emo kind of rock things. And I remember thinking, like, if your faith is so secure and your God is so mighty, then why is someone having a different belief system tripping to you? Why do you need to isolate them? And that always bothered me, because
that's it. So years ago, a friend on Twitter, I'm surrounded by like some really cool people. There was some big debate happening on Twitter, and he said, if your God is who you believe your God is, your God does not need defending. Like, you don't have to do all of this to prove the power of your God if your God is who you say God is. And that has always stuck with me. I don't have to defend God. God is God and God will be God. I don't have to belittle someone else's belief to prove the power of the God that I believe in. And I think anyone who does that, I think that comes from that does not come from a spiritual place at all. That comes from human insecurity. And a huge part with Christianity as we know it right now is that we want to be favored. We want to be chosen. We want to be better than those who don't believe the way we do.
The arrogance.
Yes, it is the Christian arrogance. And that is where that defending God and having to argue with people and prove people wrong comes from. It is human arrogance, and there is nothing spiritual about that.
I took a trip to India a couple of years ago, and I had a revelation there. We had a driver who showed us places. It was like a tour guide, and he took us to his Sikh temple. And I realized in India that I was not anti-religion. I was specifically anti-Christianity, because we went into the Sikh temple, and they had a list of their rules. And their first rule was, we respect all religions. And that brought me such peace. And I was like, wow, you would never see that in a Christian church. In fact, a lot of Christian churches would fight you to the death that other religions existing, they're going to hell. They're not, like, all these things. And it's like, the fact that I walked into a church and that immediately disarmed me, right? It made me feel like, wow, this is something I want to look into. I didn't, but I mean, it made me feel that way when I was walking through, because I wanted to gain an education. Like, what is this thing that exists and can coexist without needing to be the top dog on the pyramid?
And when we talked a little earlier about church as part of culture. And so when you look at that, a lot of our religion is not by choice. It's about when and where we were born. So the Christian arrogance that comes into play, because I was born in America where Christianity is the norm, I am going to heaven. But these people who were born here, who believe something different because that is their norm and their culture, they're going to hell. That is so nonsensical. And I personally would not feel comfortable with serving a God who that was like his beliefs, or that was how he ruled the world. Like,
and why do so many people feel that comfortable to do that, or to have in their mind that the billions of people who don't believe in this are doomed, but it is I who will be sitting next to the throne? If you don't get the fuck out of here.
Self-centered arrogance, narcissism, like it's gross when you really think about it in that way. But when you've been taught that believe this so you can go to heaven and everyone is going to hell, don't question religion, it's hard to even carve out the space to start thinking about God, theology, religion in a different way that is inclusive of people outside of the folks who are doing what you do the way you do it. Because there was even a time when I know I went to Catholic school too, and my mom was like, no, don't pray to Mary. We don't pray to anybody but God.
Yeah.
Like, they go into hell. And I was like, wait, what? And,
but you got me in this school. Right.
Right. So, and that, when you tell an 8-year-old that, it's like, so, like, who is right?
I had that too. I had that exact thing.
Yes. Like, so all these people believe something different. How do we know what we believe is right? How do I know I'm not going to hell because I'm not praying to Mary? Like, what is this?
Exactly. And the thing that makes it so even more complicated is that when you have these questions, right? Like we have a shared experience of going to Catholic school, but being raised something else. So when you put me in an institution that you feel doesn't align exactly with your religious perspective, then what is that supposed to do to me? Like there's an internal conflict that's like, well, what am I supposed to believe? And it's confusing. And also, it made me think, this conversation has made me think about how people are averse to having the gay conversation, because what I realized a few years ago is that if people have to come to terms with their church and their religious perspective on gay people being different, that makes them have to take apart their entire worldview. And they're not willing to dismember their worldview for you.
But that is hard for people. Like when and we talk about culture, like this is the foundation of so much of Black culture. So for me to have, if the Bible wasn't right about this, what else is in the Bible right about?
Exactly.
And it all starts to fall apart if you are not in like a safe place. I mean, it may just fall apart. People have their own journeys. I know people who have gone to seminary and walked out like, yeah, none of this shit is real. God does not exist. And I think the problem is, I think that happens because there is such a gap between the way people who go to seminary understand the Bible and religion and the way people who sit in pews every Sunday understand the Bible.
And let me say this. When we're talking about Christianity, we're not belittling the people who are Christians and who believe in Christianity. We're talking about the system of Christianity in the same way that we would talk about the system of racism or the system of sexism or the system of homophobia. It's less about your individual belief and about what the system allows to oppress other people. And if the system has said that these people are bad and you're believing that, then the system needs correcting for you to correct. Otherwise, it's not happening.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you get that. I have this conversation with cis hetero men a lot about about men are trash, and I'm like,
why didn't you talk to cis het men?
No one is saying that all men walking the earth are trash. What we are talking about is a system that privileges men, and it gives them a worldview that is trash for a lot of people. And we have to acknowledge this so that we can unlearn it and build a better system.
Exactly. And I mean, Black people understand when you're talking about the system of racism, right? They get
yes.
Because you always get when you're looking at somebody else. But when you have to internalize and address your own privilege, it's like, oh, I don't have no privilege. No, yes, but you do.
So, fun story. Queer theology class, and I'm reading the book, and it said something about like heterosexual privilege, and it was like I felt attacked. Like, what do you mean? And,
they got your ass.
Right. It had me in my feelings, and I literally had to replace what that book was saying about heteronormativity with whiteness. And it all made sense. And I was like, and I even went back to, there was a time when, like, I am surrounded by queer, gay, lesbian people. And there was a time when I made a decision that I was going to change my language so it wasn't so heteronormative. But I also felt a personal resistance. Like, I don't want to stop saying girlfriend and boyfriend or husband and wife and substitute this with partner, because it, like, you really feel something. And I think what we have to do is we have to get to the point where we are comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
So we can unlearn this. And I have been doing this, like, I am real bad with ableist language. And I was so proud of myself the other day because I started typing a tweet and I said something about deaf in it. And I was like, nope, don't do that. There is another way to say this. And just like, to get to that point for me, like, that was a moment I was like, okay, like, you have this awareness of privilege and you are unlearning and being better. And
I'm working on that too, the ableist language, because I know that for me specifically, I say that's insane or that's crazy a lot. And what I'm learning to replace it with is that's absurd or that's wild. Because it's the same reason why we got rid of the R word, right? Like and when you hear someone say that word in 2020, you think, how, like,
right.
Why would you, so, you know, that thing, and it makes you, and if you're not comfortable, that's exactly it. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. It's like when white people are the default in everything.
Yes.
Like, because you're the default, you don't think about all the people who aren't the default.
And that was the lesson in that queer theology class. Like, heteronormative is a problem, not because heterosexuals are bad, although I might debate that depending on the day and the time you ask me. But it's bad because it is considered the norm. Whenever you are considered the norm, you are othering other people and marginalizing them. And that is the problem. And Christianity falls into that, because Christians have privilege in America. So even assuming that other people are Christian, like, that, you are assuming a norm, and that is a problem that marginalizes people who believe different things. And one thing about Jesus, when you look at the book and, like, look at what Jesus did, Jesus pulled people from the margins into the center. Jesus's ministry was about going to people who had been pushed away from society, who were being harmed by the systems, and reimagining systems that included them, that pulled them in. Jesus talked to women like no one else did, because men didn't.
And he flipped tables when shit wasn't right inside the church too.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and I have a friend, Verdell, who tells a great story about how, understanding the temple, that couldn't have been just like one man going in there and flipping tables. That was an uprising where Jesus had got a group of people together and they went in there with the purpose of wrecking shit, to get the attention that it got and to lead to him being crucified.
And you know what, I want to pivot, because this brings up some things. We had a conversation recently about church hurt and people that are silenced when things happen to them within the church. And this can be as simple or quote unquote harmless as someone spreading a rumor about you, to the full-blown rape and sexual assault that happens in churches. And victims of all kind are silenced no matter what happens to them. But when people start expressing their hurt of why they've left the church, why they no longer associate with certain people or institutions, they are immediately silenced. It's like a mob of Christians. We've seen this happen on Twitter.
Yes.
Where someone says that someone has a dissenting opinion about, or an experience that happened to them, and a bunch of Christians jump on and say, well, you know, that's not all of us, and that was your one experience, and all that kind of thing. Why do you think that people want to keep those that have dissenting opinions or negative experience in the church silent?
The same reason that if we get into what's really behind those scriptures that we use to condemn homosexuality, if we figure out that that's not real, then it all falls apart. If we figure out that our pastor is causing harm, then what is this that we're going to sit in for 3 hours every Sunday about? What have I been giving my money to? So, and here's the other thing. There's also a shame factor. Like, I have supported this. I have believed this. I have advocated for this. So if this is causing harm, what have I been a part of? So it's that guilt shame factor that we're fighting too. And it's the insecurity. Like, you can't criticize my church or my God because this is my thing and we are good.
And is that worth the risk of the harm that something has caused to someone? Right? It's protecting, and this happens, when we protect sexual predators, outside of church. It's just like, is it worth protecting this one person or institution so much that you disregard all these other people?
No. When harm is caused, any healthy system or organization or group of people, if harm was caused, they are not afraid to address that harm and rectify it right then and there. I think when we have a fear of address, because let's be real, we are all humans. We will all make mistakes. We will all cause someone else harm. That is normal. But it should also be normal to apologize and correct and rectify that, and to fix the harm that we are causing. So when we start ignoring the harm and burying it, that's when we start building dangerous, toxic systems that are hurting major groups of people. And that's what we have to stop doing. We can't be afraid to say someone is wrong. Speaking of systems, like, there was a tweet earlier about Joe Biden said Trump was the first racist president. Now, that was just the headline. That was just the headline. I didn't click the article, but I just responded, "Oh, Joe," on Twitter. And someone was like, "Don't do Joe like that." And here's what we have to do. We have to be able to say, okay, we're voting for Joe because harm reduction. This is how we build a system to get us out. But we can't let that stop us from criticizing Joe when Joe is wrong and pushing Joe to be better. Now, if we can understand that about Joe Biden, why can't we understand that about our church? Why can't we understand that about our pastor? And why can't we be afraid to sit people down and choose better people when they are the ones behind the harm?
I have the answer for that, because your identity isn't wrapped up in Joe Biden. For a lot of people, the entirety of their personality or their identity is their religious affiliation. So that's the thing. And there are people like Meghan McCain's loser ass, who their entire personality is the political. But for your average person, how do you feel about people that say that Black people being Christians is absurd because it was a tool of colonization and slavery?
I think that's complicated. From what I understand, so Christianity was in Africa long before. And one thing that gets lost is, like, Jesus was in a very brown region. Some of the first theologians and like fathers of the church are like North African descent. So the Bible is a lot blacker and browner than we have been taught or that we understand. West Africans, when our ancestors got here from Africa, when they were brought here as slaves, they had an understanding of God. And some of this was from the tradition of like this big high God. And that's where a lot of a lot of kind of what you see in Black Panther and the ancestor talk. So the big high God was big and you couldn't reach him, but the ancestors intervened for you. So you would talk to the ancestors to get access to the God.
Which is like a reflection of Catholicism and how they do the saints.
Yes. So, and that also makes it very understand for them to like understand a Jesus through that, because Jesus is a mediator to God. So our ancestors weren't stupid. They just didn't accept colonists. They just didn't say yes, a master, and take the white man's religion. They brought in aspects of Christianity, or they kept their own beliefs and traditions as they became Christians. So it's easy for you to accept Christ and Christianity when mediators in your religion are normalized. And what I don't want people to walk away and think that like everyone is brainwashed who is still a Christian today. Now, what we can do is to really talk about how important it is that we decolonize religion, that we talk about the influence that white evangelical culture has had on our Christianity, and like where white supremacy and capitalism and homophobia shows up in our religion and why. Like Christianity was definitely used by colonizers as a way to control people and to bring them into their culture. Not all Black people fell for that, but we have to be honest about like our tradition now, and we have to there is unlearning to do. So
that's the thing, unlearning.
Yes, to be honest and to unlearn. And like Harriet Tubman, when you go to the Smithsonian, I call it the Black People Museum because I always forget the big long name, but the African American Museum of Culture and History and Culture.
Yeah, girl, I don't know.
No, the Black People Museum in DC. They have Harriet Tubman's Bible there, and I know, like, Harriet has been catching slander left and right. Like, it is ridiculous.
Girl, let's not even. That's another conversation.
But the reality is, Harriet Tubman carried that Bible with her as she was freeing the slave. Like, she fought the systems. She fought colonizers with this Bible in her hand. So it is much more complex than you are dumb for believing in the white man's religion. It should also not be simplified to this idealized God is God and there is no race analysis that needs to happen with our beliefs.
My big thing is everyone's pro-Black until it's time to talk about religions that Black people outside the United States and even within the United States are part of. You know, and there's obviously an ignorance when it comes to paganism, and it's an overarching paganism it means a different thing. It's like, for me, I know that I believe in a higher being, and I know that, for instance, the beach. First of all, not like going to the beach for fun. I'm talking about like a quiet, silent beach with me and the waves.
Yes.
That is when I know there is a higher power, and that is peace to me, and that is the equivalent of church to me. I always used to say that, because I'm from California, that the Pacific Ocean had healing properties. Just being there, and like you walk away and you feel refreshed and renewed. And so that is something that I connect to, and it made me think about paganism. It made me think about the connection to the things that have been created, right? Like sometimes we focus so much on the creator that we don't have appreciation for what was created. So, and it's like, I began to unpack the misunderstanding of religions that are, you know, that worship or deify the earth and the elements.
I'm so glad you said that, because I have the same experience. Like, my one beef with COVID right now is that I don't get to go to the beach this year and have that moment like that. Like, that is my moment to go to the beach. And like you said, when you see the water that just goes and goes and how it connects to the sky that just goes and goes, it's like, it's hard to see that and not think that there is something larger than us that put this all together.
And that's whatever it is for you. Like, for instance, I call it the universe, but I don't refer to God as God, because for me, God connects so deeply to Christianity that it's just a word, it's a title, right? Like,
that's good. And I have gotten...
I can't. Because when people do things like, oh, don't forget to capitalize the G in God, because it's don't disrespect my God and all that stuff. And it's like, I don't even want to be associated with the God that you believe in. It's not the God, it's you. And so we got separate gods.
And I get pushback from Christians when I say the universe. But I'm like, if God created Earth, God created this universe. So for me to say the universe is something God uses. No, if your God is this big bad thing that you do. I do think that, like,
Christians are really big on names. Like, you can't say Mary Xmas, like, even though X is an abbreviation for Christ, you have to say, because it's like, why are you taking the Christ out of Christmas? So it's like,
that's because we're centering ourselves. Even
that's human.
And not spiritual at all.
God is not in that.
At all. So what's interesting is the person who gets left out of Christianity, who we need to be a little bit more in tune with, is the Holy Spirit. Because one thing that I often say is Christians don't trust the Holy Spirit the way they say they do. Like, you don't have to beat people over the head to believe what you believe if you believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is what leads and guides and speaks to people in this day and time. So to pressure people to feel like you have to make them do what you want them to do, instead of trusting the Holy Spirit to lead them wherever they're supposed to be on their journey. Like, there is a problem when we think that Christianity is one-dimensional and all of our journeys should be the same, or even like outside, like religion in general. Like, all of our journeys are not the same. And when I just think about my outside of the church, just my personal journey with God, that is so personal that there is no one on this earth who could tell me what to do or how to do this, or like, it's not an equation to make it happen. And you have to trust people on their own spiritual journeys. And when you are content and confident with your God, then you don't have to make your God everyone else's God.
And so, like, what was your experience? It just came into my head. What was your experience like? Because you got pregnant very young. And so what was your experience like in church being pregnant?
That was the moment when I realized that church is not a supportive community. And when I realized that, like, our church practices are full of misogynistic bullshit. So our pastor had 6 sons. 3 of them had children out of wedlock, a phrase that I hate, but you know, church. Of course. And yet no one in our church had ever done this, male or female, but he wanted me to come before the church and apologize for my sin.
Get the fuck out of here.
He denied me communion, would not give me communion until I apologized. And that was the moment that Kia became Kia. And I was like, fuck you, no. Like, first of all, I think that's when I really start questioning, because it's like, so what's the sin here? Is it sex that's the sin? Because if sex is the sin, we can look around this church and everyone needs to be up at this altar every Sunday apologizing for their sin. Is it getting pregnant that's the sin? Because I thought kids were a blessing, and like, we were supposed to do this thing, like, you're supposed to have kids and babies and love on them and stuff. But so that was when 17, 18, and I started really wrestling with what I had learned and how a lot of it just did not make sense in a practical way, and how a lot of it marginalized and harmed people. Like, this man would not bless my child in the church because I wouldn't apologize for doing what everybody else was in there. And like, we can get into the whole sex is a sin thing and how that's some bullshit.
Well, you know, what's interesting to me is I have a similar experience, but not with a kid. I got my tongue pierced at 16, and my pastor accosted me in the hallway and asked me, "What do you want to represent?" And I remember thinking, and my grandmother, like, she never let us leave early for church. I mean, from church. And I just all I did was I said, and I said, "Grandma, we need to go now," because I knew that if I had said what I wanted to say, that it would have been a major problem. Like y'all around here having sex and kids, people having babies at all ages, and you can't control your family unit, right? But you're worried about me in a tongue ring. Get the fuck out of my face.
Mind your own house.
Mind your own business. Like, if you could see my tongue ring from the pulpit, then we have a different problem.
Oh.
Like, I don't understand. And so that always resonated with me. And there's a we'll talk about that off camera, about how that ended up. So,
yeah.
But you know, people always will focus on what they deem to be your sins while leaving their sins as a trail.
Yes.
So,
and
you know.
That was what pushed me out of church the first time. Like, after that, the kid who had gone to church every Sunday for like 18 years, I went off to college and I didn't go to church on a regular basis again until after college. And I went to church then because I was depressed, and I found a feel-good church that motivated me.
Yeah.
And I was there until some more toxic bullshit happened, and I was just like, you know what? And that is when I stopped attending church on a regular. And my parents had a hard time with it for a long time. But what I told them is, like, God, as I know and understand it, is bigger than anyone that has been talked about in the church. And it feels like a waste of time, especially when they are spending time marginalizing and hurting people instead of creating this big inclusive space for the God that I understand. And my time is too valuable for me to waste in those spaces.
And that's that. What is I don't want to take up too much of your time. What is your number one takeaway that you would say that you're getting from seminary?
So it's really simple, actually. In Christianity, Jesus said, like, Moses said it, Jesus said it. Like, or what I should say is, Jesus said that there are two rules: love God, love people. And when you look at Moses and everything that he taught, and you see in the Old Testament, that's really what it boils down to. All these laws, and we can debate the laws back and forth, but they were really about how to treat each other and how to rectify systems. That's all we have to do. Love God. When you show your love of God with how we treat each other, and I think that's where Christianity as a mainstream religion is failing. Christians treat people horrible. And until we can learn how to treat people well and have an inclusive understanding of neighbor, because it's easy to say love my neighbor when my neighbor are the people in the church with me. Well, easier because church folks are awful to other church
or who think like you and act like you.
Yes.
And have the same. Yeah.
Yes, but when your neighbor is the world, and like to care, like even wearing masks, that is a simple way to show that you love your neighbor, like you care for their well-being. we have to learn how to care for the well-being of other people and not be so self-centered.
If you could tear down the structure of Christianity and rebuild it, actually, let me not say Christianity because that's not the same thing. If you could tear down the structure of the church culture and rebuild it, what would your church look like?
I hate this question. Because people are always asking me when I'm going to start a church, and I don't want to start.
You know what? I don't mean your literal church, but I mean from your ideology. What would it be?
It would.
You starting a church wouldn't be a bad thing, though.
My church would be a space where a trans Black woman could walk in and feel safe and at home. Because foundational to my beliefs about organizing religion and everything is, if you build a space where the most marginalized person in the world can live and be well, everyone else will be taken care of. There's also this quote by Rachel Held Evans, who she passed away recently, but she's an ex-evangelical white public theologian who said, the church should be a space where no one is comfortable, and this is me paraphrasing, no one is comfortable, everyone is safe, and we tell each other the truth. And I think that's the foundation. Like, we have built churches that make us comfortable. And that goes back to what I said earlier, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable so that we can grow and be better for everyone, and we can do the work to be better neighbors.
And we are no different than, if we cannot have these conversations within our communities, we are no different than white people who can't talk about racism. You can't acknowledge that it exists. If I'm racist, if I bring up racism, okay, so then if we, like, so many of us want to exchange our oppression for privilege instead of equality, and that is a problem.
I got in so much trouble on The Bird. That's Twitter, y'all.
On The Bird.
Someone said, there was a tweet that told white people to, like, go home for Thanksgiving and to talk to their grandmama about racism. Like, if you're not holding your grandmama accountable for her racism, then you racist or some stuff. And I was like, and I need Black people to keep that same energy around homophobia at their Thanksgiving table. And baby, they were mad at me. Like, I was making excuses for white folks and racism. But if you can't, here's the thing, if you can't keep that same energy at your Thanksgiving table about the things that you have privilege around, why do you expect white people to interrupt their Thanksgiving dinner with that? Because you know all hell is going to break loose when you bring up homophobia and grandma. You already know. But you want people to be uncomfortable for your freedom and liberation, but you don't want to be uncomfortable for other people's freedom and liberation.
And that's it. That's it. And that's a wrap. We can end here. That's it.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much. And we got to do this again. This needs a part 2, honey. Thank you so much.